The loggers needed snow on the ground to be able to pull the logs out of the woods and get them to the river. They would cut them, pile them either on the river banks or on the frozen river itself and wait for the spring thaw to bring the logs down to the Mountain Mills pond. In 1904, the Newton brothers sold the Hoosick Tunnel and Wilmington Railroad. In 1906, they sold the rest of their holdings to a company called the Deerfield Lumber Company. The Deerfield Lumber Company, one of the first things they did in 1906 was to construct a railroad from Mountain Mills north through Sears Berg up into Somerset, Glastonbury, and on into Stratton. The idea of that railroad was to be able to have a more reliable and continuous supply of logs for Mountain Mills. Mountain Mills continued operation until the early 1920s when the New England Power Company began to develop the hydroelectric power on the Deerfield River.
When the power company created the reservoir that we now have in 1923, they had to take down all these buildings, and they also became responsible for moving the railroad. So the railroad tracks were relayed over on this right of west shore. They built the trestle across the water behind us so the train could continue to go on into the village. That only lasted a short time. The floods in 1927 washed out the trestle. So they then stopped the railroad at Reedsboro, Vermont, which is on the other end of the reservoir, and there it stayed till 1967 when it was finally done away with.
Every afternoon we go down, come back with whatever was, pick up whatever was at Hoosick Tunnel and come back. Shipping out was furniture from here, the chair factory, and Mother Bridge was paper, and on the way back was either pulp or oil cars for the paper mill, or whatever general merchandise came all the way to Reedsboro. It was nothing without shopping, get on the train. My mother and father and them go to Hoosick Tunnel, go to North Adams, and do their shopping, go visit some friends that was there, get back on the train and be back in Reedsboro by 6 o'clock at night.
When Yankee Atomic Electric was built, their steam generators and the reactor vessel was brought in on the Hoot Toot and Whistle. When the Bear Swamp project went in the early 70s, that ended the life of the Hoot Toot and Whistle because the Fife Brook Dam went across the original railroad bed and there was no way to get over it.
The Hoosick Tunnel and Wilmington Railroad completely changed the upper Deerfield River Valley. If you think of the impact that it had on Reedsboro, in 1880, the population of Reedsboro was 780 people. By 1910, the population had grown to 1,200 people, and it was the largest town in the Deerfield River Valley. And it had three very important businesses: the National Metal-Edged Box Company, which was the successor to the Newton's pulp mill in Reedsboro. It also had the railroad itself and the chair company, which by that time had grown to be a large company. Prior to its construction, the towns were isolated, very poor. The economy was localized, and access to the outside world was very difficult. Once the railroad was constructed, it enabled economic development, factories. It also enabled the areas to build tourist resorts, and it gave the residents a chance to get out of the valley and into the world, and it completely changed people's lives.
In 1910 and 11, the New England Power Company had been invented, and they built number 5 station on the Deerfield River in the town of Florida to provide power to the Hoosick Tunnel. At this point in time, the Hoosick Tunnel was running trains that were steam powered, and they were going to electric engines to move the trains through the tunnels. And because the air was so bad with hot steam and coal ash and smoke, they had gone to the electric engines. The number 5 station provided that power, and it was the first part of an integrated system of dams along the Deerfield River. Even though number 5 was the first dam, it was obviously numbered before it got started. The number 1 dam was proposed at the Stillwater area on the Deerfield, down by Route 91, and it was never built because the geologic structure was not there. It wasn't on hard rock. The number 2 dam is, of course, still in place. It is below Gardner Falls, below Wilcox Hollow, a fairly hefty dam there. Number 3 dam is at Sheldon Falls. That's the flashboards that you see at the potholes. And the canal goes to the Buckland side down to the powerhouse from there. Number 4 station is at the very eastern end of the town of Charlemont, and it goes, while the river goes around the bend, it goes through the mountain and comes out into a powerhouse on the Sheldon Falls side. The next power station was the original number 5 power station, built in 1911. The next dam was under Monroe Bridge, in the town of Monroe Bridge, and that dam was the number 5 dam that feeds the number 5 station through a series of canals and tunnels. The next dam up is Sherman Dam, which provided the reservoir that Yankee Atomic Electric Power Station used for its cooling water. Next up the river, we cross into Vermont, and we have Harriman Station, the one with the surge tower in the back. And that gets its water from a 2-mile tunnel that comes out in Harriman Reservoir, Lake Whitingham in Vermont. That's a storage reservoir that basically collects water during the spring and fall to use during the winter and during the summer, during the drier seasons.
The Harriman Dam, when it was built between 1920 and 1924, was actually the largest earthen dam in the world. Earthen Dam is actually made of dirt, and what they did was they made kind of 2 dams together, and they kind of washed gravel into the center of it as it was built, and built it to the top, and it's kind of an impervious core of earth.
Because it was earth-filled dam, in the case of a flood, they didn't want it to spill over the top of the dam and erode the dam out. So they put in what became termed as a glory hole, which is a very big standpipe made out of concrete that's allowed to flow down, and then that passes through a tunnel under the dam itself back into the riverbed. The next dam on the river is the Sears Berg Dam.
The Sears Berg Dam is on the Somerset Road, and it's a diversion. There's a pipe that's a diversion. It's an 8-foot wooden penstock, 8 feet in diameter, that goes about 3.5 miles down Route 9 to where the station is. But what it does, it keeps that water at a certain elevation and keeps it high, so when it runs down through the station, you're actually producing a net pressure from the elevation of the water to the center of the water wheel. They have a capacity or an ability to actually restart the transmission system from a blackout. One of the blackouts was actually affected a good portion of New England, and during that time they were able to restore electricity to the grid using that particular station.
The next dam up is the last dam, which is Somerset Dam, which has no powerhouse, and it's pretty much just a storage reservoir. So that was the original layout of the New England Power Deerfield River project.
The elevation in Somerset is around 2,100 feet. And then down in Greenfield, I know the elevation at the Connecticut River where it goes into is 105 feet. So the difference in elevation creates quite a drop along the river, but also that drop, it provides opportunities. So the generating station discharges here, discharges into the next one, it's used to generate electricity again. and used to generate electricity again further downstream. And then here in Massachusetts, it's here to generate again. So it's the water's used over and over the course of its travel down the river. The whole river system here, at one point in time, the Deerfield River was the hardest working river in North America. They had these 8 generating stations on it and were producing, 85 megawatts of energy, and it was just incredible at that time in the early 1920s.
In the very late 1950s, the Yankee Atomic Electric Plant was constructed and it went online in 1960. It continued online until 1991 when it was shut down and dismantlement and decommissioning commenced. In the 1960s, the baby boomers started buying homes and consuming electricity in new ways. That is, they had TVs now, and they had dishwashers, and they had air conditioners. And that created higher demand times late in the evening when people came home from work, and in the morning when they're getting ready to work. The power companies realized that they needed to address those peaks somehow. The Bear Swamp project went online in 1974, consisted of an upper reservoir in what had been a swamp called Bear Swamp. And they built a new dam called the Fife Brook Dam with a power station in it just upstream from Fife Brook. They're connected with a 25-foot in diameter penstock which splits and feeds 2 300 megawatt generator pumps. The pumps in the generator are the same unit, they're just reversed to pump the water back up the mountain. Once the water is allowed to generate down through the generators into the lower reservoir, when the power demand is less and the cost of electricity is down, then that water is pumped back up to the upper reservoir, waiting for the price of electricity to increase to make it profitable to generate once more through that cycle.
Well, at this point in time, the hydroelectric facilities that we have produce approximately 8% of the energy needed in New England. So between the Connecticut River and the Deerfield River, we're at 8%. We're able to produce 85 megawatts, which is 85,000 kilowatts of energy, and 1,000 kilowatts actually is about the average use of one household. So 85 megawatts is like 8,500 homes. Bear Swamp Station is owned by Brookfield Power. Those generators are able to produce about 600 megawatts. They're very large generators there. Well, in today's energy markets, people are looking for green energy. The hydroelectrics use water over and over, and it's a very good source of green energy. The difficulty is that the water's not there 100% of the time. It may only be there 50% of the time. So there's a need for a real good mix of energy using other things like nuclear or fossil fuel kind of things, burning natural gas, for example. And those are the kind of units that provide the base load of energy for our region. So these plants here provide peaking power. So in the summertime, when the air conditioners are all running and needs are getting higher and higher, we're able to turn on the generators here and supply that little extra bit of energy that's needed for the region. So it kind of works out to be what we call peaking power. In the wintertime, we have what we call morning peaks and evening peaks of energy. People are getting up and going to work in the morning. They're running the toaster and running the coffee pot, and there's a little bit of a need there, so we may start and run during the breakfast hour. And then in the afternoon or late evening, it gets darker sooner. People are turning their lights on at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and having all those needs in the evening too. We're able to smooth out those energy needs also in the evening hours during the wintertime.
So rivers belong to the public. In Massachusetts, the river belongs to the Commonwealth. No individual can own the river itself, the water flowing through the river. You can own the land underneath the river, but you can't own the river. And so the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission came about sometime in the 50s, I think, and to regulate various forms of power, and they started regulating hydroelectric dams because they were using a public resource and hopefully generating a public good, but also getting private gain from that. And up until the late 80s, early 90s, the only requirement for a license from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission was to show that you were a viable company and that you were going to be able to make money and produce power efficiently.